Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lipakshi Kuran, and moving on, the NATO summit starts in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday with heads of state from 32 member nations and other partners gathering to discuss defense strategy. It's a historic summit, 75 years since the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in the aftermath of World War II. The war in Ukraine is top of the agenda, with a wider threat of Russia as it gets more support from the likes of China and North Korea being of increasing concern. DD India's Caroline Malone reports for more from Washington.
The fighting rages on in Ukraine 2.5 years since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. A war that's now killed hundreds of thousands of people and created wider insecurity. As the leaders of 32 NATO countries and their partners meet in the US capital, Ukraine continues to push for membership.
The alliance will agree on a bridge to membership for Ukraine into NATO. What this means is that Ukraine will continue making the reforms that it needs to make and that it is committed to make as part of its annual plan with NATO, as well as with other agreements. And that in that context, we see its movement toward the alliance as is irreversible, effectively.
US officials have said there will be sessions with partners Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand to discuss the support Russia gets from Iran, North Korea and China.
Some think that NATO should have a presence in the Indo-Pacific to really push back against Chinese aggression and Chinese expansionism, while some people think that NATO should focus closer to home, get the Russia threat right first, figure out how to not just spend more on defense, but spend in a way that is efficient and in a way that allows for more continuity between various regions within the NATO alliance.
There is widespread understanding that Ukraine does need more support, additional air defences, as well as billions of dollars in weapons already sent by individual NATO countries. On Tuesday evening, NATO members will gather at a commemoration event to mark 75 years since the end of World War II and 12 allies signing a transatlantic agreement.
We will now proceed to the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Well, during the summit, NATO will officially welcome Sweden as its newest member, bringing their total numbers to 32. At least 23 of those members have already committed at least 2% of their GDP on defence. That's a huge increase from previous years and a show of a united front against Russia's progression. Caroline Malone in Washington for DD India.
Well, NATO is expected to pledge unwavering support for Ukraine this week as leaders meet in Washington, D.C. for the 75th anniversary summit of the military alliance. The United States says security threats in the Indo-Pacific will also be discussed during the three-day meeting. Nick Harper reports for more from Washington, D.C.
The US says discussions about Ukraine's membership to NATO will be central to this summit. The alliance plans to agree on what's being called a bridge to membership. That would see Ukraine continue to make reforms, which in return, the US State Department says, would make Ukraine's path to membership irreversible. NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says that allies are close to formulating the next steps plan for Ukraine, something which could be agreed on during this summit. Leaders are also expected to commit to extra support for Ukraine. That includes a command centre in Germany to train Ukrainians, the delivery of more weapons and ammunition, a substantial increase in air defence capabilities, plus around €40 billion of financial support for the country. This week, the Indo-Pacific partners, namely New Zealand, Australia, Japan and South Korea, will also be in Washington to meet with NATO heads. China and North Korea's support of Russia, including giving Moscow weapons for its war in Ukraine, has worried NATO allies. That, along with Beijing's expansionism in the South China Sea. The four Indo-Pacific partners are expected to discuss with NATO better cooperation on issues like cybersecurity and fighting disinformation, while also looking to build up defence industrial bases. The US's senior advisor for Europe at the National Security Council said on Monday that the security of Europe hinges on security in the Indo-Pacific. Leaders have already begun arriving in Washington. Later on Tuesday, they meet to officially commemorate the 75th anniversary of the alliance at the very location here in the city where the alliance originally signed the pact. Then on Wednesday, NATO's newest member, Sweden, will be welcomed before a formal dinner at the White House. And then major meetings on Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific on Thursday. Nick Harper in Washington, reporting for DD India.